Hey everyone, welcome you all. In the today's video, we are going to see what is Git and what is the architecture of Git. So what is Git? So Git is a distributed version control system and which will support a distributed environment. So we already discussed about in the previous video, there are two kinds of version control system softwares which are available. One is central version control system, the other one is distributed version control system. So Git is a software which will support distributed version control system and which is completely open source. So now if I just see what is the architecture of Git. So mainly the Git is having four different components. The one is, we can say working directory, and we can say staging or index, Git local repository, and GitHub remote repository. So we can divide the architecture into four parts. So when I say working directory, so what is working directory means? The working directory is a location where actual project files are present. So we can say it is a workspace. So workspace means wherever we are implementing the project or we are writing the code. So all the files by default will be there in the working directory. So which is also called as workspace. And whatever files which are available inside the working directory or workspace, we can call them as untracked files. Okay, untracked files. Now the second stage is staging area. So whenever you have files in the workspace or working directory, we cannot directly commit them into local repository. So local repository means every individual in the team will have their own local repositories, right? So Git is acting as a local repository. So as soon as we have files in the working directory or workspace, we cannot directly send them to the local repository. That means we cannot directly commit them into local repository. So it should go through staging. So staging is another layer, which is basically a virtual layer between our workspace and your Git local repository. So whatever files we have in the workspace, we have to add those files into staging area, or we can say index, and then we can call them as a tracked files. From there, we can commit those files into local repository. So the whole thing like working directory, staging area, local repository, all three things are present inside your local machine itself. And local repository also present in your local machine. And staging area is a virtual environment where all the files will be moved to staging. From there, we can move to Git local repository. And this is actually architecture. And once your files are there in the local repository, we can call them as a committed file or committed files. And from there, we can push them into GitHub or remote repository from where other developers or other team members can get those files. Or if you want to share those files to somebody else, we can push our code to remote repository. And GitHub is acting as a remote repository. So let me just repeat once again. So currently we have working directory. So this is a starting point where we'll develop the project, we'll write all the files. And from there, we have to send the files to the staging area before committing. And from there, we can commit those files into local repository. And here Git commit a picture. So we will add all the stuff into local repository. We can call them as a committed files. So once you move those files into the GitHub repository, or which is a remote repository, we can call them as a remote files. Now, if I just look at here, we use certain number of commands to perform this entire workflow. So as soon as you have files into working directory or workspace, we can call them as a untracked files. Means what? Those files are not a part of staging or local repository. So still they're in working directory. So once you add this command, so this is a command add. So whatever the command Git is providing, add is a one command. And when you use this command, what happens is whatever files we have there in the working current directory or workspace, all those files will be added to the staging area. And this is a virtual location which will be there in your local machine itself. And once all the files added to the staging area, then we can commit those files into local repository by using commit command. So here we use a commit command. So commit is a command by which we can send all the files from staging to local repository. So once you execute this commit command, now all the files will be committed to your local repository, which is your Git repository, which is available inside your machine. And we are called them as a committed files. As soon as you added a new files into your workspace, and you need to keep on adding those files into staging area, from there you have to commit them into local repository. So this is a continuous activity. As soon as you do some modifications, or as soon as you add a new files or modified some files in your workspace, immediately you can add them into staging area and commit those changes into local repository. So this is an actual workflow which will happen in your local machine. So once all the files are committed into local repository, which is Git, we can push them into remote repository. So everybody in the team will be able to access remote repository files because the whole project will be there in the remote repository. This is basically a shared location. Okay. And here, once you send all the files, we can use a push command here. So once you push all the files from the local repository to remote repository, now files will be shared between the team. So everybody will be able to access the files from the GitHub repository. So here we use a push command. What push will do is push command will send all the files from the local repository to remote repository. Suppose somebody else committed those or somebody else in your team pushed their code in the remote repository and those files are not available in your local repository, then we can pull the code. So we can execute your pull command. So this particular command will get all the code into your local repository. Whatever files are updated in the remote repository, those updated files will come into local repository, and those files you can directly access from the working directory. Again, you can do modifications. So here push and pull, there are two commands which we have. So here we can call them as a commit. Okay. And suppose if you want to update any files from the local repository, we can update. So here we can update or we can check out. And updation or checkout or committing will happen within your local system or local machine or local environment. Whereas push and pull actions will be happen in the remote machine. Suppose if you want to push the code to the remote repository, we use a push command. Or if you want to get the code or get updated files into local repository, we use a pull command. For example, you already have some remote repository. There are some projects are available. I want to get the whole project into local repository. So based upon the remote repository, I want to create my local repository. So as of now, I don't have any local repository. Assume that I don't have any local repository, but I already have a remote repository. So based on that, I want to create a local repository. For that, I can just clone the project or clone the remote repository. So once you clone, what will happen? The repository, whatever project you have, everything you will get, or it will automatically create a local repository. So all these things will be done by the Git software. So once we install a Git software, whatever files we have, we can add them to staging area. And from there, we can commit them to local repository. From there, we can push them into remote repository. Similarly, if there are any files in the remote repository, we can pull those files, or we can completely clone the project or clone the remote repository into local repository. We can do some changes and again, we can push it. So this is a continuous process day-to-day basis, which will happen. Now here you can look at here, there are two things. There are two kinds of repositories we can see here. One is local repository, the other one is a remote repository. So local repository means what? Which is created by the Git, which is available in your local machine. But what about remote repository? So we can create this remote repository by using GitHub. There are other softwares also available. So GitHub is a very popular one, which is mostly communicated with the Git. So GitHub is acting as a remote repository where we can push all the project and will maintain the whole project from the remote repository. So this is a central place from where all the developers will access the code from the remote repositories. But individual teams or individual developers or testers, they are having their own local repository. If I just look at here, or developer 1 or tester 1 or developer 2 and so on. So number of people are working on your team. So every individual having their own local repositories. And how they will create local repository by using Git. And as soon as you have done the task in local machines, at the end of the day, you will push the code into remote repository, which is Git. So once you push your code into remote repository, so here the branching, okay, branching and merging. So there are these things like branching, merging, or avoiding or resolving the conflicts, resolving conflicts. So all these things will happen inside the GitHub repository. So that is your remote repository, because number of developers or number of testers will push the code into remote repository. There should be some conflict. So we can solve those conflicts. And every individual team member, they're having their own branch will be created in the remote repository. And each individual developer will check in their code only in that particular branch. And once the conflicts are resolved, finally the code will be merged into master branch. So that's the final software. So we have a master branch, and master branch contains a multiple sub branches. So each individual tester or each individual developer will check in their code in those branches, respective branches. Once the conflicts are resolved, So all the branches code will be committed into the branch, committed into the master branch. That's the main branch which will be there in the GitHub or remote repository. And rest of the tasks like working directory, staging, sending the files to staging area, or committing the files into Git local repository, everything will be done in your local machine. So this is the actual architecture of Git and workflow of files. So first initially it is untracked file, then it will convert into tracked file, which is available in the staging area. And then once it is committed, it will become the committed file. And once you push it, it becomes a remote file. So this is the whole thing will be happen in the Git. This is called as Git workflow from the beginning to end. Okay. So in the next video, we will see practically how things will work by using this command. And there are a lot of other commands also have along with add, commit, push, pull, clone. So we'll also discuss those commands in the next. All right. So that's all for this video, guys. So we'll see in the next video. So thanks for watching.